Thank you, Lee, for finding the time to do this. Can you walk us through your background and what led you to where you are now? Undeniably, a very important figure in the iGaming and fintech regulatory space.
Sure. So my background's actually in the fiduciary sector. Some people call them CSPs, trust companies. And I spent most of my career working in that space. I was very fortunate to work for a really good company called ILS World, who had offices around the world, so it got me exposure to kind of cross-border trading and other things that was very interesting. I was very, very lucky. When I originally started there, somebody said, could you get a gambling license? And it actually landed on my desk at the age of, I think, 23. Having never been in a bookmaker's, never made an online bet, it was a natural choice for me to do it. And I did it and I loved it. And it wasn't necessarily the gambling side of it, it was just the regulatory piece and the just so much interesting and different to what anything else that I'd known before and really anything else that I'd seen anybody else do. And I worked for that company for 10 years and I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much that I ended up setting up Solutions Hub in June 2016, so it's our 10th year this year. And it was just dedicated to gaming, and still is actually, to be fair. We've done a little bit in the peripheries, but ultimately our core and the vast majority of everything that we do is all in gaming, because it's the most interesting thing. It's the kind of thing that I just live and breathe, and it's just the most interesting stuff that's been out there. We've merged over a little bit. I was very lucky in the early days in that I got a phone call from an old contact who said, could you do a blockchain gambling license? Which after I chuckled for a while and realized he was serious, I said, okay, well, actually, yeah, I think you can. It doesn't quite fit regulation, but we can sculpt it if we can make some compromises. We did it, and that led on to being quite early in that space. We gained some traction, we got bigger, we ended up, that attracted then more traditional players, and we've just kind of grew from there, and largely we just continue to execute on new things, but within the same sector.
Yeah. In a recent opinion piece, you drew a striking parallel between US prohibition and the current UK regulatory environment, what you call prohibition by attrition. You illustrated how a combination of duty, increase, blanket advertising restrictions, and mounting compliance obligations creates what you call the vacuum that pushes players towards the black market rather than reducing overall gambling. Can you walk us through that paradox? And critically, are you seeing any evidence that this regulatory attrition strategy is already driving capital, talent, and innovation out of the UK towards perhaps more balanced jurisdictions?
Yeah, sure. I don't think that what I've said is actually particularly sort of unique. You hear these messages in the industry, probably compartmentalized a little bit, and where I may have done okay is wrap that up in a story. What I do believe is that if you want to forecast the future, you look at the past. If you've got disruptive technologies, it's not a case of, okay, you're going to go and disrupt and break the law and you just live like that forever. Generally, the pattern for these things happens. You have something new, it doesn't fit a framework, you do it for a period, and if you get big enough fast enough, if you're not big enough fast enough, it just either dies as an industry or it gets stamped out, or if you get big enough fast enough, you actually become something of interest because there's a tax base there, there's something that employs people, that creates value, and then you become interesting, and then you get welcomed into the fold. And that's happened across lots of different industries. It happened, back in the day with peer-to-peer betting exchanges. There was a lot of people that lobbied against that, and of course, but their size and scale and interest created value, and that value was then, rewarded with bringing into the sort of traditional licensing. Every time you look at different sectors, like I say, you can kind of look at the past and see, okay, the real world rules apply. We did quite a lot in crypto and ICOs and other things, and real world rules apply to those as well. When you're taking significant value off people and you're putting it into something else, there's, if you change the names to something else, you can find real world services that apply. And that is generally how you kind of think about, or how you forecast what's going to go forward. With the kind of attrition side of it, I don't think it's a deliberate step. Nobody, I would imagine, is sitting there in the UK turning around saying, let's penalise these people like they've done something wrong. But it is just an obvious thing to the industry, and there will be lots of calls in the UK to turn around and say, oh, they're just whining because they're having to pay the proper tax. It's not a question of proper tax. If everybody was on the same playing field, that's fine. But the problem is they're not on the same playing field. You have all of these other organisations outside of the regulatory sphere who are effectively competing against you, who don't have the same barriers of entry that you do, who don't have the same costs that you do, who don't have the same restrictions that you do. There's an argument to say, yeah, but you get the availability to advertise in the UK. That's great, but unfortunately, physical advertising in the UK is only part of the piece. Digital advertising, which has no boundaries, is a totally different space. So you are just penalised constantly against the black market. So really, if you're going to go aggressively, if you're going to do significant tax hikes, significant changes to kind of responsible gambling policy and other matters, and have all of these things converge in a fairly short space of time, you need to back that up with effective prohibition measures for the people that are outside the market. Without those, you're competing against people that actually you can't, because you've got an inferior product. And what kind of makes it worse is that, you know, you've got a whole swathe who are moving towards that black market at the moment. And I think you can see that there are other licenses that have opened up with no value. And people are moving to those, and they're sort of advertising, oh, we've got X number of licensees now. And then all you have to do is go and look at a few of those licensees. And, you know, if you're not in the UK, just VPN through UK or VPN from what should be regulated and restricted markets. And you can see that you can deposit, and you can see that you can do things. And then you can see that they can do things like, you know, cross-product promotions and other things. You know, all of this new stuff that's getting added to restrictions is very, very difficult. I'm not advocating that they shouldn't happen. I'm just advocating that we need to take a step back and take a broader picture.
Same thing as is happening with the ban on advertising in Italy.
Yeah.
Same thing. Let's talk about emerging markets. Africa, Southeast Asia are exploding with potential. What do you think? Should operators wait to enter markets like Nigeria, Kenya, and beyond until clearer regulation is in place, or would they be missing out? What are the risks?
I think, again, it's about a balanced and, critically in this element, an informed approach. So you mentioned Nigeria. It's a very interesting one. I've heard for years about the demographics of Nigeria, about the smartphone penetration in Nigeria, about the general literacy around gaming products and other things. And at a high level, you can hear lots of things that might think, oh, okay, yes, that's an interesting jurisdiction. But do you really know the jurisdiction? Do you really know the player behaviours? Do you really know the movement of funds? Do you really know how you're going to acquire players and everything else? You know, do you know the regulatory situation beyond doing some Google searches and understanding it? I'm a firm believer that if you are going to commit capital to a new jurisdiction, I mean, we're talking about continents, but continents are very, very different. As you know, look at Europe. There's very, very different models that work and do and don't work. When you're looking at a continent, I think we need to sort of move away from the continental kind of thinking and get into the country-specific thinking. Engage local law firms and local expertise, and make sure that you've got a real understanding of what the current situation is and what the horizon looks like, how stable that is, and everything else. Mixed in with, you know, you may have a very large, very capable, very confident affiliate team, but that doesn't mean they work in a new jurisdiction. So we need to think about, you know, the way that your promotions are structured might be structured because you're a UK licensee and you've got them in a particular way. Trying to do that again, just in another jurisdiction, or thinking, oh, I can remove some barriers here and that will work. Does that really cater for that local knowledge that you need? A friend of mine works for quite a big company providing dating apps, and he tells me that area used to be saturated with big companies. Now it's all tiny companies who are very, very niche, and that's kind of where I think that the gaming industry is moving a little bit, is you need that local expertise. You may be one bigger brand, but you need some real local stuff. And it's about the efficiency of how you run multiple brands and multiple operations into multiple jurisdictions that I think is probably going to reward those in the long term. But it is that future planning and horizon planning, and knowing that if it isn't regulated today, when is it likely to be? What is that transition process? What are the pitfalls of entering now versus waiting? A lot more than just the high level, it looks like a good jurisdiction because of these 6, 7, 8 demographics, which is often what people look at. They don't actually look that much deeper other than, where the industry is going. We saw that a few years ago with Brazil and some other places. Everybody went, let's go make money in Brazil. And then in reality, very few, if any, make any money in Brazil. So yeah, it's because of a whole plethora of reasons, which probably weren't understood at a board level when people were deciding whether or not to do it in the first place.
Consumer protection and responsible gambling standards on one side, commercial realities on the other. How does this balancing act look like in practice? Are you concerned that stricter regulation is accelerating consolidation, reducing market competition? Doesn't that ultimately harm consumers?
Probably not at the moment, I would say. It feels like a very sensible thing to say. It feels like a very, of course, we don't want a highly consolidated market with only a few players offering, only a limited amount of innovation and product and everything. However, there are still, in the UK as a prime example, there are still so many licensees. It's actually arguably, so saturated right now that I think sensible says yes, but actually from if you just do the research, you can, well, actually, how many licensees are there and what type of products are available and how many people are offering, particular verticals. It would say that we're not there yet. I think the bigger and deeper problem is not necessarily around consolidation. I think that as a reaction to what's happened in the UK market with tax and with various policy updates, I think we're going to get some consolidation for sure. For certain. But we're not there yet where it's become a problem, I don't think. I think the deeper problem is how do those players, even if the market was consolidated to 20 players, how do they make money still? It's going to be difficult.
It's okay, go for it.
Yeah, okay. So you've expanded Solutions Hub into Dublin. What does the business case look like for embedding a physical presence there? And what's the timeline operators should expect for licensing under GRAI?
Well, what we can see is a shift to lower regulated markets, a shift to .com licenses with limited history value, even some quite punitive issues around the ability to, get decent acquirers or banking payments, etc. It's quite short-term thinking, I think. It's an acceptance that, we can no longer do .com through for a properly regulated business. We'll shift somewhere where they're not looking as hard. That suggests that the industry dies in 10 years' time, certainly the .com space. I don't think we're there yet. And actually, I think we should be looking the other way and saying, okay, where can we peg our revenues in regulated markets that are far more stable and whatnot? You just have to accept that the sort of a .com license, the markets for them are shrinking, and that's fine. You can still operate the hub and spoke model. You have your hub in a relatively tax-efficient jurisdiction with the right talent and whatnot to place that, the likes of the Isle of Man, Malta, others, where you've got these big talent pools. And then you have your locally regulated license. And that's good long-term. That builds a lot more shareholder value, gives you a lot more trade sale potential, gives you a lot more potential to do listings, etc. When we looked at Ireland just looked very sensible because it's got the metrics in terms of, LTVs and other things around the actual gamblers themselves are very, very good. It's a small population, but those themselves are very good, very affluent, etc. We know that, they're, suitable across all betting products. And to be honest, it's at a good time because of what's happening with the UK. If I was a business that was saying I'm going to enter a regulated market now, would I say I'm going to go after the UK's X million or significantly less than Ireland? I'll still do Ireland at this point, because it's going to be, it is far less saturated. The restrictions are, there is an element of alignment there in terms of they are not coming in with a light touch regime. Really, it is a little bit more considered at this point. But the taxation is critical. It's far more sensible from that perspective. So actually, pegging 5-10% of my revenue in Ireland seems much more sensible than the UK or other places where, again, we're seeing a lot of fluctuation and issues. So it was more around, if it's my gambling business and I'm looking for where my next suite of revenues are coming from, obviously I've got some ideas in a .com space about where you can target cross-border, but from where can you actually go into for an insular license and say, okay, I want to go into that actual regulated market, Ireland seems very sensible to me. In terms of why put a physical office there, commitment. We're not just saying we're adding Ireland as a licensed line, business line for us, and we'll do Irish licenses. We're not just saying that we are open there as a brand. We want to be physically there to show commitment, not just to our customers, to the GRAI, to all parties that are interested, that we've actually spent some money and done something material, as opposed to just adding it to another license that we could potentially offer.
Okay, Solutions Hub has clearly set a standard in the sector. As you look to the next phase, what does success look like?
It's interesting. We are not VC owned. We are not private equity backed. It is owner-operated business. So our success is just more humble than others. We don't need to grow at a particular rate. We don't need to do, anything other than be consistent. For me, all of those sort of lessons that we're often taught in business, but are from sporting areas, are all about consistency, determination, all these other things. And I think there is some lessons there in if you want to be a good, reliable business. If you concentrate on the right things first, the revenue and the other sides will come. So for me, it's about continuing to get the right people. So we have, people from sort of operational compliance backgrounds, from operators. We have people who are former regulators. That's the kind of makeup of people that we want. We want people who have value, who have kind of lived and breathed the things that they're actually trying to deliver for clients. And if we continue to attract those type of people first, that gives us the ability to provide better service and more varied service and different service in different jurisdictions, etc. So if we just continue to focus on the people, continue to focus on delivering the service well, everything else will come. I don't need to go to investors and tell them a big strategy about what we're going to do over the next 12 months, because it's not relevant for our business as a private entity. But I think there's value in that, because that means that we can be quite nimble. We can pivot when we need to. If we see opportunities, we can go after different opportunities, and we don't kind of need to have shareholder approval, etc. So for success for us is just all about stability. Stability, continuous growth, knowing that our customers appreciate us, like us, want to do business with us. This over the last 12 months, we've had some new customers. We've had some sort of expanding customers or customers that have used us in different jurisdictions where we've originally started in the Isle of Man or elsewhere. But we've also had customers return. Customers who have done successful trade sales 4 or 5 years ago, so their non-competes have come up, and now they're returning as new customers. That is just so sort of humbling, but also it's just so joyous for me and the rest of the team, is because it does say that actually you were appreciated and they do come back and they do want to do business with you. So we don't want to be big flash in the pan, look at us, how great we are. We just want to be consistent and do things well.
Consistency and stability.
Yeah.
And in this industry, that is...
And not too flash.
Yeah, that's not necessarily always the focus. Thank you very much, Lee.
Thank you.
For your time.